Welcome to New York 47 presented by Verizon. I'm your host, Niki Lattarulo, and today we are joined by Mets beat writer for The Athletic, Will Sammon. Will, thank you so much for joining the show. Let's see how many topics we will cover today. 6 topics for the sixth train. With the trade deadline approaching, we're going to focus on some spots in the Mets roster that could be improved on July 31st. So topic number 1 is third base. The Mets have had a backlog of third basemen this season in Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, and Ronnie Mauricio, but Will, no one has seemed to secure the job outright. What have you seen from those guys so far?
Yeah, so this was not on my list of positions at the beginning of the season that I suspected they would have to address by the deadline. But lo and behold, here we are. I think in June for the Mets, their OPS from their third baseman is below 500. That's not good. It's actually the second worst in baseball behind only this ahead of only the Cincinnati Reds. And usually from third base, you're typically trying to get like a 700 OPS. I feel like most of the teams in the majors this year have received that, particularly in the month of June. The Mets did not. Obviously, they've tried some different players. Mark Vientos is the one guy who has returned to the lineup, who I feel like is a huge part of the lineup, or at least he was supposed to. And I feel like his struggles really underscore the struggles of the whole team because him and Francisco Alvarez were two guys who the Mets really relied on heading into the season to lengthen their lineup. And with Alvarez now in AAA, and Vientos yet to get going, even dating back from his time when he was healthy before landing on the disabled list in April and May. Their lineup has not been as long as we thought it would be. And so at third base, without Vientos, they had tried Brett Beatty, they had tried Ronnie Mauricio. Neither really, like you said, Nikki, took the job and ran with it. They didn't get much production from them. It's looking like a situation where maybe they could use sort of a veteran presence, especially like if you are relying on Vientos and if he does get going, he's not the best defender anyway. And so ideally, like I think that they went into the season thinking like, okay, maybe we would use a Brett Beatty in that role. And he could do that kind of thing. But we have not received enough to make the Mets or to make us convinced that the Mets should go with that route. And so, yeah, I do think it's a position that kind of has jumped out as a need. And it's not really one that the Mets wanted to address at the deadline heading into the season because it meant pretty bad things. And that's what we're seeing right now.
And I feel like last year was kind of the start of this. It was like, oh, Vientos, Beatty, and now the fact that this is still going on, it kind of goes to show that maybe they need to address this at the deadline. Do you think they should go out and get a veteran guy?
I do actually. I think that they should address it in a way that like maybe it doesn't completely take away playing time from that situation because I do think that it's important to see Vientos. I think that he deserves it. We're talking about a guy who hit more than 20 home runs last year and had a terrific postseason, by the way. And he had shown some signs of good things during those 2 months that I said before where he was healthy. He was not showcasing the power yet. But I do feel like if you give that guy enough at bats, that will come. I do feel like it's important to remain a believer in Mark Vientos for that reason because he has proven at the major league level. The other guys have not. So I think that you're asking a lot if you're saying to yourself like, okay, Brett Beatty's going to all of a sudden figure it out, or Ronnie Mauricio, for that matter, is going to figure it out at the major league level, and we're going to see those tools that everybody sort of salivates over with the hard hit rate and the ability to just launch balls, 450 plus feet. So I think that acquiring somebody to help out would be essential across the infield because that could help you out at second base as well. All these positions, in my opinion, are connected. They're woven together because the more that, say, Vientos plays third base, the Mets have leaned a little bit more on Ronnie Mauricio and Brett Beatty at second base. And so and then they moved Jeff McNeil in center field a little bit. So all these are connected. I feel like a veteran presence who has that major league track record, whether it's a little bit at third base, a little bit at second base, that should help this team.
Let's move on to our second topic, which is the DH. Jesse Winker on the IL working his way back. The Mets have not found much consistency in that spot. We've seen flashes from Starling Marte, like we just mentioned, Mark Vientos not looking like the version of himself from last season. And there hasn't been another guy that stepped up those stats this season. The DHs are batting 224 with a 697 OPS and just 10 home runs. Should finding a consistent DH be a priority at the trade deadline, or do you think they have enough pieces currently to rotate through?
I think it depends on Jesse Winker. I really do. I think he's one of a few players where they really have to see what they have there and make sure that he's healthy. He has already started a rehab assignment, which is good. However, because of his injury and it being an oblique and that being a tricky one, it may require a little bit more time than say like a few days. I think that they'd like to see him kind of get into a groove offensively. And the real bummer for him actually was like he was doing fairly well. I wouldn't say he was hot necessarily, but he was getting there. He was showing some really good things right before that injury, after a little bit of a slow start the first couple of weeks of the season. So it was a real bummer for him to be sidelined when he was. And that said, though, like the DH position, like you said, Nikki, they haven't really gotten a whole lot of production from it offensively. I feel like Starling Marte, however, has done better. I feel like he's done better than league average, and I feel like he has defied some expectations in a pretty tough role for him because this is a guy who is used to playing every single day, and now you're telling him, hey, we're only going to use you in these specific situations, and you have to be ready and you have to perform. It took him a little while, and there were points of it where I was like, hey, I'm not sure how long this is going to last for Starling Marte here. But he proved me wrong for sure. And I think he deserves some credit actually for doing so, because things were not looking great. And he has been helpful. He has not been the reason why the Mets lineup has struggled. Sure, he has not been perfect, but he's been pretty helpful for the role that he is cast in. I think that the guy that you really want to pinpoint there or highlight is Mark Vientos. Again, this is a situation where he's not the best defender. So sometimes it is most optimal for the Mets lineup to feature him at DH. But for that to work, he has to hit. And I think he went, what, 1 for 13 over the weekend in his return. Extremely small sample there, so not to pick on him at all, but he needs to pick things up and he needs to be that guy who we saw last year. I feel like last year he had all that confidence and it was working for him. He may have been a little bit overconfident heading into spring training because of that. Like he may have said to himself, hey, maybe this is just the way it's going to be. I'm going to do well. And part of that you want to see, you want a young player to be that way, but then the other part of it is you don't want to go to the other extreme. And I feel like maybe his confidence in that instance could have been a detriment in some ways, at least, because he has even said, like, look, I was a little bit surprised by it. It kind of it took me a little bit aback, the struggles that I had. So he's got some work to do. And feel like between Winker's return and perhaps Vientos getting it done eventually, they should be okay at DH. It all kind of depends on Winker coming back and being the guy that they expect him to be on that side of the ball or at that side of the batter's box, and then Vientos kind of stepping up and doing his thing.
Yeah, I think if you look at the American League and the National League, every team seems like they're in it now, especially with the expanded playoffs. So it's like some of the Mets, like quote unquote, worst guys are maybe better than the guys that will even be available. So it's like kind of a tough situation, but hopefully the rest of the lineup can pick it up. And then the DH spot wouldn't be the biggest area of concern. But let's move on to our third topic, which is center field. The loss of Jose Siri has left Tyrone Taylor with the bulk of the center field reps, with the occasional fill-in from Jeff McNeil. We saw Jeff McNeil with the home run robbery against the Braves. Will, do you like McNeil in center, or do the Mets kind of need to keep him at his permanent position at second base?
So throughout his minor league career, Jeff McNeil always wanted to play center field, which is kind of interesting. They never really gave him the opportunity to do so. And like now he's sort of running with it. And he's another guy who has really kind of defied what I thought he was capable of. He's actually
Yeah.
looked fairly okay there. There was that one play with Brandon Nimmo where he had a near collision and dropped the ball and it
Oh,
was an
yes.
error. That wasn't great. That was not a great situation. But I will say that instances like that have been few and far between. He has made some routine plays. His range clearly isn't going to be something like Tyrone Taylor's, where he could utilize some speed and get to balls. He's not going to be able to do that. He's going to have to read balls well and get to what he can get to and communicate with the other two outfielders about what he can't get to. So far, I feel like he's done an adequate job. You're asking a lot for Jeff McNeil to play in this capacity, but offensively, they kind of need him at that spot. And so I feel like they're willing to subtract a little bit of defense at this point just because of the struggles of their lineup, where we've seen recently they're relying a little bit more on Jeff McNeil and they're having Tyrone Taylor come off the bench in a defensive replacement capacity and not necessarily start because over the last couple of weeks he wasn't giving them much offensively. So, like I said earlier, the best lineup has been Jeff McNeil in center field, somebody else at second base, and maybe Vientos at third base or DH, and figuring it out based on who you're playing against and who's pitching against you. That said, early on in this experiment with Jeff McNeil, They were getting some good production from the left side and the right side between him and Tyrone Taylor. It's not exactly happening right now. Tyrone Taylor has not been the offensive guy that they saw earlier in this experiment. And so I do feel like they're going to have to address that position and acquire somebody different, and that will help. Cedric Mullins is a name that's out there. That's a pretty good defender, and it could also help you with the lineup. Luis Robert was another one, but he's now on the IL because of a hamstring injury. So we'll see what comes out of that if he's back in time for a trade. But those are a couple of names. There's some more out there as well, but I do feel like center field is an area where the Mets should address and upgrade.
Yeah, definitely you want that good defense, but it seems like right now the offense is the biggest issue and they got to address that so they can get some production there. Moving right along, let's head to our fourth topic, which is the dreaded starting rotation that just seems like it had so much and now there's just so little left. Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, Tyler McGill remain on the IL at this point. Griffin Canning now out of the season with the Achilles injury. Will, has the starting pitching become now the biggest problem for the Mets?
I think so. I think their pitching in general is the biggest problem, not just the rotation. It's also the bullpen in some areas. But just staying with the rotation for a second, yeah, you mentioned the injuries. They'll get some guys back, hopefully, but we don't know exactly when Sean Manaea was going to pitch that final rehab start that he was on deck for. He had the loose bodies in the elbow, so he was shut down for a little while. He began throwing again recently, but they did not, as of yesterday, single out a date where it was going to be, hey, that's going to be the start, and then we can expect him on this date. So it's a little bit up in the air still. It's a little bit murky, and they should get him back, and they should get Kodai Senga back. They're not going to get everybody back, of course. Griffin Canning's going to be out for the season. Tyler McGill's yet to resume throwing. So some of these guys have to perform better than we've seen. David Peterson picked the wrong time for a slump. His mechanics are a little bit out of whack there, so he's got some addressing that he needs to do. And then Frankie Montas, he did not look like the guy that he was on that opening start when he pitched 5 scoreless innings. He reverted back to the guy that was pitching in the minor leagues for rehab assignments and just didn't have it as far as his fastball goes. So they have some questions that they need to address in their starting rotation. They're not getting any length from any of these guys right now, and that's been a huge sort of concern because it affects their bullpen. And then after a while, you're relying on so many guys to pick up the slack, and it's just not going to work out day in, day out that way. You need guys to pitch 6, 7 innings at least once in a while.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the bullpen in just a little bit, but it feels like there's no consistency at all. And it's just every day you're just hoping that the pitcher will get through at least 5 innings, which is a problem when there are so many injuries. But starting pitching is such a high commodity right now with the expanded wild card. Do you think the Mets go all in on an ace? Because especially like Kodai Senga, Sean and I are supposed to be their aces and they're not here. Or do you think they just work with what they have, especially the minor league guys, and use that pitching lab?
I'm not sure an ace is available. Sandy Alcantara may be the closest thing to an ace who's available, but he's not off to a good season now that he's back healthy for the Marlins. And is he somebody that you could say, okay, he's our playoff guy down the stretch? I'm not sure. I mean, so like he may be that guy. Mitch Keller is another option. These are guys that may be helpful to getting you to the playoffs and getting you on that track. But I'm not sure if they scream to me, hey, this is your ace, this is your game one starter type.
Something else that's been struggling is the bullpen, which brings us to our fifth topic. Let's talk about the bullpen. You mentioned it earlier. That was a strength the Mets had earlier in the season. Now it's struggling. Their stats in June of 5.47 ERA, 112 hits, 69 runs, compared to in May, they had a 2.50 ERA, 70 hits, 33 runs. Will, where do they go to get more quality arms in this bullpen?
Well, at least for the bullpen, that's one area where I feel like every year there are options there that you could address, right? So like you could get a couple of guys. They did so last year, and they did so sort of on the fringes, whether it was Phil Maton or Ryan Stanek or Brazoban. And for the most part, I mean, Ryan Stanek became a key guy for them down the stretch, especially in the playoffs. So you can strike gold there as far as the trade deadline goes with relievers. It's a little bit on the easier end. That said, they do need some help, clearly. Right now, I think they're dealing with some guys who are just battling some confidence issues, whether it's Brazoban or even Dednell Nunez. And when you look at both of those guys, those could be seventh, eighth inning type pitchers. They're that good, particularly Nunez. However, he needs the confidence to be that guy, and he needs results to kind of give him confidence. And I think that's an issue in their bullpen is that they have a few guys who they need to see results in order to sort of believe in themselves and believe in their best pitches. They're not getting those. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword there, is that you need one thing to get the other one. And when you're not having it, you don't have either one. So right now they're going through it in their bullpen. And it's a shame because Edwin Diaz is having a lights out season and they just cannot get to the guy with a lead. So it's unfortunate for them. There are a couple of guys, whether it's Jose Budo or Reed Garrett, who have been fairly consistent, but it's just when you're, like we talked about before, when you're asking them to pick up huge innings for you so many times, eventually it's going to catch up to them. And I feel like that's what we're seeing with some of these guys, in addition to some of the confidence issues that I'm seeing as far as their inability to go with their best pitches at times, and other times just not having the command that we're used to seeing.
People say this team goes as far as Edwin Diaz takes them, but it does not seem like that's the case this year. They need everyone to do well in order to even like get out of this crazy slump that they were in the month of June. Well, we are on our sixth and final topic, and it's a wild card topic. So it's up to you to decide any other position you think the Mets should target at the trade deadline.
It's a great question. I don't know if it's second base or third base. I know we talked a lot about third base. But for me, I just want to underscore the idea of getting a infielder. I feel like an
Mhm.
infielder to kind of address whatever position that they feel like gives them their best lineup, whether it's McNeil at staying at second base or Vientos staying at third base or putting him at DH. It just becomes a huge necessity for this team. And frankly, it was not one because of their love of giving some guys some chances, some young guys some chances for their infield. It was not one where they expected to need to address, or definitely did not want to. But definitely, I feel like the infield is an area where if you looked at this on paper, you see all these young guys and almost a logjam of them. And frankly, they haven't really produced enough. So for me, it still remains the infield. Because also when you look at it, it's not as if like they could do a whole lot of other things. Like they have a premier shortstop, they have a catching situation that they still feel comfortable in. So it's not something like, hey, left field or right field, or they have these guys that are locked into these spots, first base. So there aren't that many. It's just it's a combination of, hey, like we need some of our guys to step up and perform to their capabilities, but we also need to address some areas as well and get some fresh faces in here who could provide a little bit more reliability.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting time for the Mets surrounding that trade deadline. You know, their infield, like you said, they have a lot of young guys that have so much potential, but just don't seem to be clicking. It's like they're all slumping at the same time, or then they all look okay at the same time. So a lot to be addressed at the trade deadline on July 31st. Will, thank you so much for joining us. That's all the time we have. Thanks for watching New York 4 to 7, presented by Verizon. For Will Sammon, I'm Niki Lattarulo. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again here soon.